when the army came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, apparently one of the first things that I said was, you can't kill anybody in the name of my child. I didn't know that I said that. I was told that afterwards. But that was like already a sign of what I was going to be doing with the rest of my life.
You're listening to the podcast, Women Ending War. I'm your co-host, Elana Sztokman, a Jewish Israeli-American, along with my co-hosts, Eva Dalak and Dr. Fakhira Halloun, Palestinian citizens of Israel. Together, we are activating peace. Welcome.
Shalom Aleichem, Elana.
Assalamu alaikum, Eva. How are you, Habibti?
I'm good. Happy to be here with you.
Likewise, happy to be here with you. We have here today Robi Damelin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Robi is the spokesperson for the Parents Circle Family Forum. Did I say that right?
Bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, in Hebrew it's the Forum Mishpachot Shkulot, which is a very unusual concept here in Israel, which is that you have Israelis and Palestinians mourning their losses together, the Bereavement Circle. Yes?
Well, it's not a therapy circle.
Okay.
The work that we do is for the public at large. What we do have and what we recognize is the shared pain. Mm-hmm. And that's the premise from where we work in many ways, because that's how you make that emotional breakthrough. When you share your personal story, if you're a Palestinian with an Israeli, they suddenly recognize that we share the same pain. The tears are also the same color. And so that's what makes this organization so powerful, because if we, who are the least likely people to want to work together, can stand on a stage and talk in the same voice for reconciliation, then surely that should be an example for other people. So what we really want as a vision is to create a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any political future peace agreement. We've signed all kinds of stuff on the White House lawn. Everybody hugged each other and ate hummus, but the people were not involved, and they were not aware of what the meaning of reconciliation is. And so all the work that we do on the ground, and if you want to go into some of the projects, I'm happy to do that.
Sure.
Is geared towards an understanding of seeing the humanity in the other and recognizing the shared pain in many ways.
That's beautiful.
Very powerful. Do you want to talk a little bit? Well, let's hear a little bit about your programs, yes? And then we'll ask about you.
Well, I'll tell you first about me.
Okay.
And then we'll go into the programs, because it's a kind of result of a choice. You know, when you lose a child, you make a choice. Many parents die together with their children, or they create wonderful monuments, or they decide to create a library or some kind of honorarium that they give. It's all very personal. It's a decision. Some parents decide to die with their children, not physically, but they become numb. They don't do anything. And I respect everybody to make their own choice of how they're going to use this event, which changes your life forever. And so when the army came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, apparently one of the first things that I said was, you can't kill anybody in the name of my child. I didn't know that I said that. I was told that afterwards. But that was like already a sign of what I was going to be doing with the rest of my life. I mean, this whole forum, Parent Circle, took over my life virtually.
What year was that?
2002. I joined the Parent Circle. Well, I spoke at a huge demonstration 3 months after David was killed. And it was quite prophetic, because I said it was one of the demonstrations that they used to have at the municipality. And there were 60,000 people there. And I suddenly realized that you have no fear when you lose a child. I have no fear. You can actually put me anywhere in the United Nations, talking to people who hate me, all kinds of things like that. I'm not afraid. And I think that's a result of loss. What else can happen to me?
Like the worst thing has already happened, so you have nothing to fear.
Yes. And so at this demonstration, one of the things I said was that we cannot do this alone. We must have a Palestinian partner. And some of the members of the Parents Circle were there, and they heard what I said, and they came to see me. And they invited me to come to a weekend in East Jerusalem to meet other bereaved families. I wasn't dead keen to do that because I knew I wanted to do something to prevent mainly other mothers from experiencing this pain. And I didn't care where the mothers came from. But I didn't think that I wanted to have other people's loss on my shoulders. But I didn't realize that these were the people that understood. Who else could understand this pain except another mother? Those are the people who eventually brought me the most solace. And that's a lot of the work that we have to be doing now with bereaved mothers from both sides. And so I went to this weekend and I sat around the table, and that's when I realized what a powerful tool this would be if we could travel and talk in the same voice. And I closed my office. I had a PR office and started to travel all over the world with a Palestinian partner and thought I was extremely important. Well, I could speak English and answer ridiculous questions, and I was pretty pleased with myself, and I'd found something that was meaningful, but I hadn't been tested. So I came home one night after various trips, and there was another knock on my door, and I opened the door, and there were 3 soldiers standing there. And I thought, I can't lose another child. So I just kept slamming the door in their face, and they kept knocking. And eventually I opened the door, and they said, we came to tell you that we caught the man who killed David, thinking I would be delighted, and dance around my lounge with revenge. But that's actually when the whole work became impossibly difficult, because he has a face now. Do I mean what I say? I'm talking about peace, talking about reconciliation, and do I mean it? So it took me about 3 months, and I wrote a letter to the family of the man who killed David. His name is Thaya. And I told them about the Parents Circle. Today we are 800 families, more or less half, probably more Palestinian than Israeli, which makes sense. And I told him all about David, my son. He was a student at Tel Aviv University, and he was studying for his master's in the philosophy of education. And he was part of the peace movement, and he signed a letter to say that he wouldn't serve in the occupied territories. And then he got called to reserves to the occupied territories. And here comes the quandary, of an Israeli kid who's grown up, what to do.
Right.
And he came to talk to me, and he said, I don't know what to do. If I don't go, he was teaching kids at a mechina, philosophy. If I don't go, what will happen to my students? They're going to be inducted into the army. Is that the right example? And if I don't go, what will happen to my soldiers? Because he was the officer. And if I do go, I will treat people with dignity, and so will all my soldiers. So who do you think you know the person behind the gun? You really don't. And I actually understood much more when I was giving a talk at the American Embassy about 3 years after he was killed. And there was a Palestinian sitting in the audience, and he kept looking at me. And a lot of people are don't want to talk to bereaved parents. They don't know what to say. Basically, I can say that it's a good idea not to say anything, just be there. And so after the talk, I said, what? To this guy. And he said, I just want to tell you, he was a Palestinian man. I drove through the checkpoint the night before your son was killed. And we got into a conversation. And we had this wonderful talk. And they saw the humanity in each other. And he said, the next day when I heard your son was killed, I was so sorry. That's the essence of the work that we do, is this recognizing the humanity in each other. In any event, I also told the parents of Thaya that we should meet, that we owed that to our children and grandchildren. This is a long story. I'll cut it short.
I want to hear it. Don't you, Eva?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
So, of course, I'm not the most patient character in the Middle East, to say the least. And I expect to have a reaction from fire within days. It took 3 years. And by the way, reconciliation doesn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it may never happen.
Process, yeah.
And so eventually after 3 years, I got a letter which he wrote over Ma'an, which is the Palestinian equivalent of Ynet.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that I was crazy. I already knew that. And that I should stay away from his parents. And that he killed 10 people to free Palestine. But the fact is that I knew from his parents, because 2 Palestinians from our group delivered the letter. And the parents told them that when he was a little boy, saw his uncle violently killed by the Israeli army. And then he lost 2 further uncles in the Second Intifada.
It's a cycle. It's just the cycle.
You see, so here's the cycle of violence and the belief that there's revenge. He didn't know that there's no revenge. And by the way, it's more or less on the list when Gilad Shalit was freed, to be freed. And now, again, the name is coming up. And I say, free this man if it brings back 1 hostage. What is the sanctity of human life is a hell of a lot more important than this man sitting in jail for the rest of his life. I actually wrote him a letter. I'm a big letter writer. No, I believe that, I wrote a lot of letters to David. It's a very therapeutic way because we didn't really get to say goodbye, and this was my way.
So you write a lot of letters. So you write a lot of letters even to the killer, and his family thinks that you're crazy, or he thinks that
everybody thinks I'm crazy, so it's okay,
It's okay. But, here, I feel like now that we're having this ceasefire now and all this topic of, releasing the prisoners, even with so-called, blood on their hands kind of thing. And here you are saying you're one of the people whose son's killer is being released, and you're here saying, do it. Just do it.
Of course, but I'm not the only one in our group who's saying that. There are others who have already been released, who have definite blood on their hands. Mm-hmm. One of the women in our group's father was killed by 2 Hamas with an axe. It's a terrible story. But she said, why didn't they do this 300 days ago?
Yeah.
And then maybe more hostages would have been released.
Yeah.
And if we have an army, that's their responsibility to make sure that these people don't go back and commit crimes, which they didn't do. Otherwise, perhaps we may not have had October. But the thing about understanding is really why I'm telling you this story. When you understand why, it doesn't mean that you condone. It means that you can begin a conversation. And that's why I wanted to meet this man. In any event, when he wrote this whole letter, so for me, that was a kind of giving up being a victim and becoming very free. I'm so at peace with myself. That's quite incredible.
Wow.
And I'm grateful for that.
And it's because you made these choices. You talked about the choices that a bereaved parent makes.
Yes.
So how would you describe your choice that freed you?
I wanted to change the world overnight. My reaction when David was killed is very similar to my reaction of October the 7th, was we have to do something now. I've been to America. It will be in April for the 7th time since October the 7th. I've been to Italy twice, to London and to Germany to talk about the work of the Parent Circle and to try to handle polarization. And this is what I really want to tell your audience, because I think it's more important than my story or anything else, is that the polarization in the whole world, there's absolute great experts on the Middle East that have popped up everywhere. The polarization, the importation of our conflict into other countries, which creates hatred amongst Jews and Muslims. So, if the World Bank has to ask me to come to do a workshop in Washington because the Jewish staff are not talking to the Muslim staff. That's pretty pathetic.
Did that happen?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
So I said yes, and I went with a Palestinian partner. I went mainly because I wanted to meet with Georgetown University, who've been our mentors for many years. And so we went and we did a dialogue meeting in Georgetown, and we had dinner with the president. And I'll tell you a little side story about that dinner. I was there with a Palestinian from Jenin. He's a nurse. He became a nurse because he couldn't save his brother who was killed. And we were sitting, and the Joya, that the president, was sitting in the middle, and I looked at Muhammad and I said, wow, you should come and study here. And the president said, I can make that happen. And he's there for a year, got a scholarship, and you never know what's going to come out of your mouth. But at the same time, we asked if we could create an online education program that universities and campuses and synagogues and people like the World Bank can use, and could Georgetown help us do that? And they said yes. And so what we did is we have filmed 3 dialogue meetings of Palestinians and Israelis telling their story. It's called Listening from the Heart.
Oh, wow.
And
heart-centered communication that I
yes. So, and it has question and answers and a manual that Georgetown helped us create for the facilitator, because most people have no idea what to do with this, how to handle this whole drama. And so then I met the woman who, chutzpah is not, I'm not unknown for that. We met the head of the teachers union in Washington. Her name is Randy Weingarten. She's a lovely, lovely woman. And she invited us to give a dialogue meeting, which we did. And then she invited us to Texas to present the program to the teachers union. There were like 3,000 teachers, which we did. And they endorsed the program, which is great. And then I met the head of NYU, Linda Mills. We did a dialogue meeting for them, and they fell in love with this program. So I was in New York, and we launched it at NYU. And then NYU invited 40 Palestinian and Israelis from our group to come to Prague, because they have a branch in Prague, and to meet with students from NYU. And in the meantime, we've done this on so many campuses, and actually in April we'll be in Los Angeles, so it'll be UCLA, and then Berkeley, and in San Francisco. And so that's the work that we're doing, but that has nothing really to do with the work that we're doing on the ground. There's ongoing work. We have not stopped since the war. Which is very unusual, because a lot of groups never, fell to pieces. But we understood very soon, like 2 days after the war began, we had a staff meeting. We have 2 offices, one in Bet Jala. I don't give you a minute to ask a question. I'm sorry. I'm just talking.
I was actually, my next question was going to be how October 7th affected you. So you're right on target. So that's fine. So that's all good. So October 7th, how did October 7th affect you really? Keep going.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so why I was talking about understanding why, we'll get to that. Because that's very important. And that's why I told the story of the sniper. Because when I understood why is when I wanted to meet with him. But I can't meet with him because the law says he has to ask to meet me. I mean, I really believe in restorative justice, and I've done a lot of work in Europe on restorative justice. It's good to be very ancient, because then you can do lots of things in your life.
Okay, so you started to say that you had a staff
so
meeting.
We had our first staff meeting, and we have 2 offices, one in Bet Jala, one in Tel Aviv. We have 2 of everything. It's like Noah's Ark. We've got 2 women directors for the first time, women. which pleases me no end.
Me too.
And we have 2 people in charge of education, of spokespeople, 2 of everything. Nobody can make a decision without the other. Listen, this makes it very difficult. Don't make any mistake. It's not all about agreeing on everything. And so 2 days after the war began, we had our first staff meeting, and everybody had watched their own television. And so that was like a parallel universe. And that's the test, to see if you can listen with empathy, even if you don't agree. And
we talk about this all the time, these parallel realities, especially via the media. You know, people are seeing completely different things. Anyway, yes, we talk about this all the time.
You know, and there's so much anger and so much fear around both sides. And most people don't know very much about the West Bank, but I can tell you that the situation there is very dire, and that we need to be aware of what is happening. And I promised the women, like before I went to the States, I had a Zoom with all the Palestinian women, and I asked them to tell me what their daily life was like, so that I could tell audiences all over the world what it's like to live in a closure for so many months since October the 7th, for your husband not to be able to work, for the settlers to run rampant with no accountability, for your children not to go to school regularly, for the fear that you have of driving around. This is happening to all of our staff daily. This isn't something that I'm making up. And so that reality the world has to be aware. And now with Janine, one of the kids who was part of our summer camp and part of the young ambassadors, was killed 2 days ago.
Oh, no. How old was he?
And so he was a nurse also from Janine.
I'm sorry.
So, you know, it's just like there's so much death, but most people have no idea what the human element of a conflict is. I ask the students many times, give me the name of one child that was killed in Gaza or one of the hostages. And there's no humanization of the conflict, so that people talk numbers. So I see a little boy standing in Gaza with his cat. Palestinians love cats. They're allowed to go to mosques. I only learned that recently. I also love cats and dogs. So he was holding his cat, you know, and he said, I'm not going to the south unless you let me take my cat. And there was this whole argument with his parents, and eventually they gave in and he got in the taxi with his cat. And then I saw this girl coming out of the hostage with the dog, Bella. Of course, I remember the dog's name. I can't remember the name of my neighbor, but the dog I can remember. And then, you know, those are the human consequences of this madness. And people don't see it like that. They might then value life more.
There is a question that comes to my mind. So I lead the organization Peace Activation that I launched on October 7, and we basically hold safe and brave spaces online for people to come and listen to each other's perspective. And the only guideline is to speak about your feelings and not to respond to each other. So every person shared their story. And we've done also collection of story from Israel, West Bank and Gaza, in Arabic for the Palestinian and in Hebrew for the Israeli, and mixed the whole stories together to see what are the patterns, what is actually the shared humanity indeed. And the question that comes to mind and that I encounter very often is like, okay, about this people to people and shared humanity. We do have shared humanity, and we can eat and you know, sit and eat hummus together and drink tea together and shared our pain and grief together. But this doesn't touch upon the structural violence. And what I say is like, it's not a question that we don't like each other. There's like a structural violence here that we're not addressing and that haven't been addressed. And I think the cycle of violence, repeated cycle of violence that go on, and more people die on both sides. And then we have meeting and dialogue, interface dialogue, parent dialogue, and, you know, different, trying to find common ground. But at the end of the day, we're not addressing the fact that there's occupation and there's a power dynamic and power struggle that create the violence and feed the violence. And so I wonder, how do you, especially because you're so aware of what's happening on your Palestinian colleagues and they're aware of what's happening on the Israeli colleague, how do you actually tackle this power dynamic, or do you actually tackle it and the structural violence that allow this violence to continue?
That's a very complicated, it would be a very complicated answer also, because I think people have no patience. We're still in the middle of a war, and I see the anger and the reaction and the not knowing each other. Look, we work in schools. I mean, we worked in schools until the Ministry of Education decided to throw us out last year. We went to court, we won, but now it's all starting up again. They don't, we're dangerous. I'm very dangerous. And the Palestinian equivalent who comes with me is also very dangerous. He's a terrorist and I'm Bogedet, traitor.
Traitor, yeah.
So that's how this government has cast you.
Yes, that's how
they got the Ministry of, excuse me, sorry. The Ministry of Education has cast you as a persona non grata. It started off with Ben Gvir in his great wisdom, draped in a flag. It's like also I'm not answering your question, but I will.
Yeah.
No, because I think it's about not knowing each other. Because I can tell you that if you go into an average Israeli classroom, and I did a lot of this, I like talking to young people, 17-year-olds. And you ask them, who of you have ever met a Palestinian? Never mind a Palestinian from the West Bank, a Palestinian Israeli citizen? Probably nobody, or maybe one in the class out of 30.
Yeah.
Then you ask them, and who speaks Arabic? Maybe one, because his grandmother came from Iraq. And who's been overseas? 98% of the class.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you realize that there's no connection. I see it in the summer camp. We have a summer camp every year. Again, the government tried to stop the summer camp. And the American embassy intervened and the German embassy. And at the very last moment, we had the summer camp. And I have a grandson who went to the summer camp who's pretty spoiled, I would say. I mean, he really has been overseas with his grandmother, Harry Potter, all the stuff that kids love. And he went to the summer camp and he said to me, Safto, this was the best week I've ever spent. And I tried to work out why. It's the alleviation of fear of the other. And we don't alleviate that fear anywhere. So when I get to know a Palestinian mother and she first comes to the parent circle, usually it's in order to tell us how terrible we all were, what we did to her family member. But through her telling her story, the more she tells her story, firstly, it is very graphic, where the blood was, how many bullets, how far it was, all the graphic details of the death. Eventually, they start to talk about the person that died. And that's the next step in healing.
Yeah.
And so for us, the only way the main method that we use is to tell a personal story.
Yes.
This is how that emotional breakthrough happens. And so when I say to you, the cycle of violence is constant, yes, because people want revenge. And if you think about it, what happened on the 7th of October? The Israeli army was defeated. And so that's humiliating. What happens when you're humiliated? You want revenge, right? And then we couldn't do this huge saving or like Entebbe of the hostages. And so that's also very humiliating. And so it begins to explain some of the behavior. It doesn't condone. What I keep saying is you have to understand why so that you can change.
I hear you. I mean, we're coming from the same perspective you're preaching to the choir, but I think that there's something there around the structural violence that hasn't been addressed. I'm Palestinian. I grew up in Jaffa. I was a peace child. I've been into all these different dialogue group, people to people. Let's understand and humanize the other. So I come from this world. And I left Israel at the age of 19, traveled to France to study, then worked in Africa. And at the start of the second Intifada, I have taken a decision not to touch anymore the Palestinian-Israeli conflict because I considered it A, not a conflict, and B, that nobody's actually touching or addressing the structural violence that explain and justify the cycle of violence that is indefinite. And we're constantly wanting to bring us together to humanize each other and to meet. But then the structural violence is not changed, even before Netanyahu, before Evan Gvir. So for me, my comeback to the conflict, or whatever we want to call it, I call it a tragedy. For me, it's not a conflict, it's a tragedy. It's really a Greek tragedy. And what's happening right now, it's not a war. For me, it's a genocide, because I have family in Gaza that was like exterminated. And
well, we all use terminology.
Yeah. Of course, and I'll come to that. And so for me, and as I said, I launched peace activation so that we can hear the story of the other. I don't want to be in competition of suffering. I don't want to be in a competition or comparison of narrative or graphic, or your people did this. And that's part of the reason why Elana and I do this, because we want to show that even if our narrative is different, and even if our truth is different, we can still sit together and share a similar agenda of, for me, I call it peace activation and not peace activism, because I really deeply believe in the activation of peace within us. It is our responsibility to activate peace and not to be saved. You refer to like the drama triangle. We're like perpetuating a drama triangle of like the victim and the savior and the perpetrator, and sometimes the Israeli are the perpetrator, and sometimes the Palestinian are, sometimes this person is so for me, it's like we need to step out of this drama triangle. And you refer to restorative justice. Absolutely. I work in Rwanda and in Burundi, and that's the only way that we can have true reconciliation, and truth and reconciliation is hearing the narrative of the other.
Well, even one of the programs that the Parent Circle run is called the Parallel Narrative Program.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it started really through what happened was within the Parent Circle, we understood that we had a sympathy for each other, but not an empathy for the history story of how you see your history. So it started off with 140 Palestinians and Israelis from our group, 70 from each side. And it was my baby, and everybody thought I was crazy. They always think I'm crazy because I come up with weird ideas. And I said, if we're going to ever get to really trust each other, we have to know how each side sees its history. And so one of the first things that we did was we were supposed to go to Yad Vashem, to the Holocaust Museum, and I came, and the Palestinians came to sleep in East Jerusalem. Those were the days. The night before the trip, and we would go the next day to Yad Vashem. And I came to the hotel, and I see everybody's talking about Al-Aqsa. And then I suddenly think to myself, oh my God, they're going to go to Al-Aqsa and they're not going to come, and a million things running through my head. The ex-dictator that I told you about. And then I said, okay, just go to sleep. Because if you were a Jewish tourist and you came here, what would you want? Because these Palestinians couldn't come to Al-Aqsa, under a certain age. So just trust that everything will be okay and go to sleep and stop interfering. The next morning I got up and there were 70 Palestinians sitting in the bus. And I said, well, what about Al-Aqsa? And they said, we can pray outside. So then we went to Yad Vashem.
Meaning that going to your program was more important to them at that moment than the Al-Aqsa, which was a big victory. Like it was not a victory, but like a big, like a.
But it was triumph. So good that I stayed out of it, and then was their decision. And then we went the next day to Ekbeba because we wanted, some of the people from our group came from that village originally. And I remember this woman was standing there crying. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, this is the well that I drew water out of as a child. Now, it's not that you're going to blow up whatever's there and build a new Palestinian village, but you will understand with empathy the pain that she's experiencing and why she's walking around with a key to a door that'll never open. And so this is very much part of what we do. And then we have a Palestinian historian and an Israeli historian, each one telling the milestones of our history through their eyes, which is a completely different, it's a parallel universe again. But this is the learning to listen with empathy, even if you don't agree.
So I'm wondering if what you're basically suggesting is that that the first step is the humanization of the other via this empathetic listening, and that somehow what will hopefully emerge from that is a deeper understanding of root causes, of all those systemic issues that Eva is referring to. You're looking at if I'm understanding you right, you're saying you have to look at the root causes. You can't just say, okay, this is nice, we're connected, but you have to look at the structural issues, the systematic issues that are causing all of this pain. And I think what Robi is suggesting is that that it emerges from that once you're listening and once you've opened yourself up to be able to hear the other person's story, you're able to see wider things than you might have previously. Is that right?
Yeah, but what you said is so important is there's no comparison of suffering. Mm-hmm. You can't compare suffering.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very important part of the work that we do. And I think the Narrative Project, we did it, I think we have something like 2,000 alumni from this, and they are doing, and they're not bereaved,
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar to, as I said, it's similar to the project, to the story collection that we do at Peace Activation. But at the same time, for me, the situation is not complicated. For me, it's complex. We are constantly dealing with dilemmas. And within the dilemma, we need to make a clear choice and take responsibility for the reality that we're creating, that we're part of.
Well, we're all part of the system.
Exactly.
Listen, I was brought up in South Africa. Mm-hmm. Even if I was in the anti-apartheid movement, I was still part of benefiting from the system.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we have to be very careful.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And so it's articulating. It's just, for me, it's just articulate what I noticed within the meeting that we do with Palestinian and Israeli. It's not comparing, it's not competing, but the fact of articulating and hearing that your suffering is being taken into consideration, I think is huge in the process of reconciliation.
Of course.
It's like you feel heard, you feel validated, you feel seen. And what happened in conflict, and I've been working in 22 conflict zones, and that's the learning that I'm coming with, is that in the essence, the root cause of the conflict is the break of communication and the breakout of the shared humanity.
Well, we're saying the same thing virtually.
Yeah. And then, but at the same time, we have the wheel of the root causes of conflict, and communication is one of the root causes. And then if we look at it wider, we have the structural violence that has to be addressed for conflict to be transformed. Otherwise, we will not transform the conflict. We can fix certain things, but it's not enough.
Well, I look at South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
If you would have told me when I came to live in Israel in 1967 that after being in the anti-apartheid movement, I was really in the anti-apartheid movement to annoy my parents. And, I was not the person I am today. Okay? I was pretty wild and did ridiculous things, as a young person does who doesn't really understand the consequence of actions. But if you would have told me when I came here that blacks and whites would actually sit in the same room and look for a way not to kill each other, and that there wouldn't be a bloodbath in South Africa when Mandela came out of jail, I probably would have said you were mad. And so I look at that. It's not an ideal situation because everybody wants instant solutions to everything. It's a process. It's going to take a very long time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't judge. But
and so I look at South Africa. We made this film called One Day After Peace. And because for me personally, it was about also understanding what is forgiving. What's the meaning of forgiving? And of course, I ask that in every talk that I do if it's not a big audience. And everybody comes up with a different answer, and I don't have the monopoly on truth, but I met this woman. And we can kind of end with this because I think it's such an important statement. She had lost her daughter, was killed by UPLA, the military wing of the African National Congress. And she went to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and she said to the people who killed her daughter, I forgive you. Now, I wanted to know, what did she mean when she says, I forgive you? So I went to meet her. It's all in this film. And she said, I said, June, please tell me what's your definition of forgiving? And she said, for me, forgiving is giving up your just right to revenge. And then I met the guy who actually sent the people who killed her daughter. And they have an organization together where they work with ex-combatants. And I thought he was going to be some monster, Turns out this lovely guy who says, by her forgiving me, she released me from the prison of my inhumanity. Mm-hmm. That's an extraordinary statement.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I do think that your work is radical in its own way, in its sort of gradual process. I've been going to your event, the joint memorial service. I've been going for, 5 or 6 years, something like that. And each year it grows bigger and bigger. And this past year, we did it in people's houses. And so I hosted one. And I had a few people there who had never been to a joint memorial service. And, just having those conversations is already breaking something, because people are so used to, Israelis are so used to seeing, the Palestinians as the enemy. And just that radical idea of saying, we have this shared humanity. And like you said at the very beginning, you said our tears are the same color. Is that how you said it? That itself is, it's like the first shot at like cracking open this whole system that we're in.
We had a meeting on Sunday. I'm on that committee. Last year, we did the children. I wanted children in war because I thought that's so important. Mm-hmm. And this year, I came up with choices. We'll see what happens, because there are, since October the 7th, the most extraordinary people have come out of this war. This is what gives me hope. When I look at the family, the Inon family, and when I see, there's a lovely story. Yeah. I'm a storyteller. Okay. So if you want to, okay. Their parents were burned to death in Netiva Asara on October the 7th. The mother was an artist, and she had a studio, and the fire actually stopped at the steps of the studio, which is extraordinary. I was there. I saw this whole layout. There's nothing left of the house except this beautiful studio where she collected stones from all over, and she made spirals, mandala. And so we had a meeting with the women's group, and the two girls, the two daughters, brought a whole bunch of stones from the mother's studio, and we all wrote something on a stone, and we put it in a basket, and each person took a stone out, and I got vision, Orphic, which I like. Mm-hmm. But then we made a big mural, and I just, I look at these two people. One of them's on our board now, and the son of Vivian Silva is on our board. So surely that must give us some hope. And we've got Musa he lives near Ramallah, who lost 30 members of his family. But he hasn't left. Only 3 families have left the forum since October 7, and so many have joined. For me, that's terribly important because it's time for a new generation to come up, and the stories are so extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you. What comes to mind is, because you speak about the vision, so I live in Costa Rica, and there's one, I don't remember the name of this indigenous leader, but she said that there's 4 agreements that Spirit gave to the human soul, and one of them is forgive the unforgivable and have hope is an action, hope as an action. I don't remember the other 2. But I think that's what you're touching upon. It's like in the circles, you're forgiving the unforgivable because you're moving beyond what had happened, and you're using your hope as an action to take action.
Well, without hope, there'll never be peace. Yeah, that's a huge part of the equation.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll end with your granddaughter, what your granddaughter wrote.
It's about this boy that got killed.
Mm-hmm. Yes? Mm-hmm. The one in Jenin?
Yes. Mm-hmm. She's 20. Mm-hmm. And she just got accepted to New York School of Music, but I don't think she's going to go. I don't know.
What's her name?
She sings jazz, Mia.
Oh, Mia. Okay.
So we're very good friends because I love jazz also. So.
Okay. Wow. Mm.
I can't believe it. I'm just seeing it now. My heart is broken. Our dear, beautiful friend. He was one of the best people I've known, so smart and kind and funny and full of love, with the purest heart there is. I want to remember him for his life and his laugh. I will always cherish it deep in my heart. I'm so sorry for his close friends and family. I will always miss you, Tamam. Beautiful soul.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing
that. Thank you. Okay, tough.
What a waste.
Yeah.
You know, here's this kid going to become a doctor and being a nurse to be a nurse in Jenin is horrific anyway.
So much waste. So much
It's
waste.
all a waste.
It's all a waste.
Everybody's life. Doesn't matter who you are. It's just a bloody waste.
Thank you so much for the work you do. And thanks for being here today.
Marhaba, Elana.
Marhabten. How are you, Eva?
I'm good. Very excited.
Yes, I'm very excited. We got a great season coming up. You should all watch and stay tuned.
Stay tuned and let us know what you're thinking.
Yeah, share.
We love getting your feedback.
We do. Comment, share, like, all of that. Subscribe.